The autumn rain had just stopped when Dr. Marcus Rivera stepped out of the University Medical Center, his physician's coat replaced by a tailored navy suit. As the head of internal medicine at Metropolitan General, he'd grown accustomed to long days that bled into longer nights. But tonight felt different. Tonight, he was heading to his second job, the one that truly mattered. As Deputy District Attorney for the county, Marcus split his time between saving lives in the ER and seeking justice in the courthouse. It was an unusual combination, one that raised eyebrows among his colleagues, but Marcus believed healing and justice were two sides of the same coin. Both required precision, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. The hospital parking garage was nearly empty as he walked toward his silver sedan. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the concrete pillars. He was fumbling for his keys when he heard the footsteps, measured, deliberate, getting closer. Dr. Rivera. Marcus turned to see two men in dark suits approaching. Their badges caught the light as they held them up. Internal Affairs, Metro Police Department. Gentlemen, Marcus nodded, instantly wary. Is there something I can help you with? Detective Lieutenant Carl Brennan, a stocky man with graying temples, stepped forward. We need to ask you some questions about your recent prosecution activities. Specifically, your investigation into certain police procedures. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. For the past 6 months, he'd been building a case against several officers suspected of excessive force and evidence tampering. The investigation had been quiet, methodical, exactly the kind of work that made powerful people nervous. I'm happy to discuss my cases through proper channels, Marcus replied evenly. You can contact my office tomorrow to schedule this. Can't wait, Brennan interrupted. His partner, Detective Ray Sullivan, had moved to Marcus's left, effectively boxing him in. We have reports of misconduct in your office. Allegations of prosecutorial overreach. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Marcus had spent 15 years building his reputation, first as a physician, then as a prosecutor. He'd never cut corners, never bent the rules. Every case he brought was meticulously researched and ethically sound. That's absurd, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the anger building inside him. My record speaks for itself. Does it? Sullivan spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a hint of menace. Because we're hearing different stories. Stories about a prosecutor who's forgotten which side he's supposed to be on. The implication was clear. Marcus had crossed a line by investigating police misconduct, and now they were here to remind him of his place. But Marcus Rivera had never been one to back down from a fight, especially when he knew he was right. Gentlemen, unless you have a warrant or formal charges, I'll be going home to my family now. He moved toward his car, but Brennan stepped directly into his path. We're not done talking. Yes, we are. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'm calling my attorney. Sullivan's hand shot out and knocked the phone from Marcus's grasp. It clattered across the concrete floor, the screen cracking on impact. Oops. Clumsy of me. The mask was off now. These weren't investigators seeking truth, they were enforcers protecting their own. Marcus realized with crystal clarity that this wasn't about misconduct allegations. This was about intimidation. You're making a mistake, Marcus said quietly. A very serious mistake. Brennan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The only mistake here would be continuing this crusade of yours. Some cases are better left alone, document. Some stones shouldn't be turned over. And if I refuse? Then you'll find out just how difficult life can become for someone who doesn't know when to quit. They left him standing there in the parking garage, his broken phone at his feet and their threat hanging in the air like exhaust fumes. Marcus picked up the pieces of his device and walked to his car with deliberate calm. But inside, his mind was racing. He'd seen enough corruption in his dual careers to recognize the signs. The case he was building, involving planted evidence, falsified reports, and systematic targeting of minority communities, had struck a nerve. These weren't rogue cops acting alone. This was organized, institutional, and now it was fighting back. At home, Marcus found his wife Sophia reading in their bedroom. She looked up as he entered, immediately noticing his expression. What happened? Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and told her everything. Sophia listened without interruption, her face growing more concerned with each detail. They threatened you, she said when he finished. It wasn't a question. They tried to intimidate me. Marcus reached for her hand. But they miscalculated. I'm not backing down. Marcus, be careful. If they're willing to confront you in public, what else might they do? It was a fair question, one that would prove more prescient than either of them realized. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the district attorney's office to find his assistant, Rachel Chen, waiting with a stack of files and a worried expression. We have a problem, she said without preamble. 3 of our key witnesses in the Henderson case have recanted their statements. All in the last 12 hours. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The Henderson case was the centerpiece of his investigation, a pattern of evidence planting by Officer Derek Matthews and his crew. Without those witnesses, the case would collapse. Did they give reasons? Family safety concerns. All of them used almost identical language. Rachel's voice was tight with frustration. This isn't coincidence, Marcus. This is coordination. Marcus nodded grimly. The message was clear: withdraw the investigation, or watch it crumble piece by piece. But Marcus had spent too many years treating victims of police brutality in his ER. He'd seen too many cases where evidence mysteriously disappeared or witnesses suddenly changed their stories. He wouldn't let it continue. Start making copies of everything, he told Rachel. Every file, every statement, every piece of evidence. Store them off-site. You think they'll try to access our files? I think we need to be prepared for anything. Over the following days, the pressure intensified. Marcus's parking spot at the hospital was vandalized. His medical license came under sudden routine review by the state board. Anonymous tips about prosecutorial misconduct flooded the DA's complaint line, but Marcus had allies. Dr. Patricia Vance, the hospital's chief administrator, quietly moved his most sensitive patient files to a secure server after his office computer was accidentally wiped during a system update. Judge William Torres, who'd known Marcus for years, began fast-tracking hearings for the corruption case, sensing the urgency. Most importantly, other victims began to come forward. Teresa Alvarez, a nurse at the community clinic, contacted Rachel with a story about being stopped and searched without cause by Matthews and his partner. David Kim, a social worker, described being detained for hours on trumped-up charges after filing a complaint about police conduct at a domestic violence call. The pattern was becoming clear: systematic harassment of healthcare workers, social workers, and anyone else who might witness or report police misconduct. Marcus realized he wasn't just prosecuting individual bad actors, he was exposing an entire system designed to silence accountability. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Officer Janet Morrison, a 20-year veteran with an spotless record, requested a private meeting through Rachel. They met at a small cafe outside the city, where Morrison laid out the scope of the corruption. It's not just Matthews, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There's a whole network. They call it professional courtesy, covering for each other, intimidating witnesses, making problems disappear. Anyone who speaks out gets transferred, demoted, or worse. How long has this been going on? Years. Maybe decades. But it's gotten worse lately. More organized, more aggressive. Morrison slid a flash drive across the table. Internal communications, shift reports that were never filed, complaint forms that were lost in the system. I've been documenting everything. Marcus stared at the drive. Why now? Why are you coming forward? Morrison's jaw tightened. Because last week, I watched them plant drugs on a teenager who reminded me of my son. And when I tried to report it, my sergeant told me I must have misunderstood what I saw. She met Marcus's eyes. I didn't misunderstand anything. The evidence on Morrison's drive was damning. Text messages coordinating false arrests, emails discussing which judges were friendly to police testimony, shift schedules designed to ensure the same groups of officers worked together on sensitive cases. But as Marcus and Rachel worked to build their expanded case, the retaliation escalated. Marcus's teenage daughter Elena was followed home from school by an unmarked car. When Sophia confronted the officers, they claimed to be responding to reports of suspicious activity in the neighborhood. The next day, Elena found her bicycle tires slashed. The message was unmistakable: your family isn't safe. That night, Marcus sat in his study surrounded by case files, wrestling with an impossible choice. Continue the investigation and risk his family's safety, or let corruption continue and betray every victim who'd trusted him with their story. Sophia found him there at midnight. You're not going to quit, she said. It wasn't a question. I can't. Too many people are counting on this. Then we do this together. All of us. She sat across from him. Elena and I have been talking. We're scared, but we're also proud. You're fighting for something bigger than just us. Marcus felt a surge of love and gratitude for his wife's strength. But he also felt the weight of responsibility settling heavier on his shoulders. The crisis came 2 weeks later. Marcus was leaving the hospital after a particularly difficult shift when he noticed the black SUV trailing him. Instead of heading home, he drove toward the police station, hoping the presence of other law enforcement might deter whatever was being planned. The SUV accelerated, pulling alongside his car at a red light. Marcus glimpsed 2 figures inside before the passenger window rolled down. He saw the gun barrel a split second before diving across the passenger seat. The windshield exploded. Glass rained down as Marcus pressed the accelerator, running the red light as bullets shattered his rear window. He drove frantically through downtown streets, taking random turns, until he was sure he'd lost the SUV. When he finally stopped at a 24-hour diner, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely dial Rachel's number. "They tried to kill me," he said when she answered. The attempted assassination changed everything. What had been a local corruption investigation suddenly became a federal case. FBI agents arrived within hours, not to intimidate Marcus but to protect him and gather evidence. Agent Sarah Hendricks, a veteran investigator with the Bureau's Civil Rights Division, took over the case with grim efficiency. "We've been watching this situation develop," she told Marcus during their first meeting. "Your investigation uncovered something we've suspected for months: a systematic conspiracy to obstruct justice under color of law." "How extensive is it?" "Bigger than you imagined. The network you identified connects to similar operations in 3 other counties. We're talking about hundreds of false arrests, planted evidence in dozens of cases, and systematic intimidation of witnesses and prosecutors." The federal investigation moved with startling speed. Morrison's evidence, combined with Marcus's files and testimony from dozens of new witnesses, painted a picture of corruption that reached high into the police department's command structure. Captain Robert Hayes, Matthew's supervisor, was arrested first. The charges included conspiracy, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice. Hayes' arrest triggered a cascade of confessions as lower-ranking officers scrambled to make deals. Matthews himself was found with over $50,000 in cash hidden in his basement, along with drugs that had been checked out of evidence storage but never returned. His partner, Officer Rick Thompson, provided detailed testimony about the planting of evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence, but the most shocking revelation came from Detective Lieutenant Brennan himself. Facing federal racketeering charges, Brennan confessed to running what investigators called the Shield, a network of corrupt officers who sold protection to drug dealers, planted evidence on rivals, and eliminated threats to their operation. The attempted assassination of Marcus had been Brennan's desperate attempt to stop an investigation that threatened to expose decades of systematic corruption. The trials dominated local news for months. Marcus testified for days, walking judges and juries through the careful documentation that had exposed the conspiracy. His dual expertise as both physician and prosecutor proved invaluable. He could speak to the medical evidence of police brutality while also explaining the legal implications of evidence tampering and witness intimidation. In the end, 12 officers were convicted on federal charges. Brennan received 25 years in prison. Matthews got 15. Captain Hayes was sentenced to 12 years and stripped of his pension, but for Marcus, the real victory came in the reforms that followed. A new police oversight board was established with genuine investigative powers. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers. The evidence storage system was completely overhauled with independent auditing. Most importantly, a whistleblower protection program was created to encourage officers like Morrison to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. Marcus returned to his dual role as doctor and prosecutor, but the experience had changed him. He established a clinic specifically for victims of police brutality, providing both medical care and legal advocacy. Elena, now a sophomore in college, interned there during summers, inspired by her father's example. On a warm spring evening, exactly 2 years after that confrontation in the parking garage, Marcus stood in the same spot where Brennan had threatened him. The hospital was installing new security cameras and improved lighting changes that had come too late for him but might protect the next person who dared to challenge injustice. Rachel joined him, now promoted to chief prosecutor in the unit they'd created to handle police misconduct cases. "Any regrets?" she asked. Marcus thought about the fear, the sleepless nights, the moment he'd seen that gun barrel pointed at him. He thought about the families who'd been torn apart by false arrests, the evidence that had been planted, the victims who'd been too scared to speak. "None," he said finally. "Justice isn't convenient. It's not comfortable. But it's necessary." As they walked back toward the hospital, Marcus felt the satisfaction that came from knowing he'd used his privileges, his education, his position, his voice, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The badge and the briefcase, the stethoscope and the law books, had all served the same purpose in the end. They had served justice.